Uh, First of all, let me express my gratitude to organizers of the conference, also to uh, uh, inviting me to participate in this conference. I'm honored to give a paper today in this beautiful place, especially in occasion of this festival. The subject of my paper is analysis of characters of evangelists who successfully spread Christianity from it was seen as this cue for colonial policy. Accordingly, missions of Christian preachers were greatly comprehended as they were frequently preserved as Roman representatives. That is why Christianity with a threatened traditional life and way of thinking could be successfully preached in frontiers only by particular type of personalities. Frontiers always produce or attract some certain personality type who was trusted by natives, who became symbol of frontier societies. Due to above mentioned factors, this is scarcely preserved evidence of the organization of successful professional missions beyond Pax Romana by the Ecumenical Church. According to the sources, Christianity was first preached here by Christian Roman captives, sometimes even slaves. Thus, new faith was spreading from house to house, inside small societies, inside army, and but sometimes most talented and extraordinary people were able to spread this process and develop this process, baptizing big communities and even ruling families, thereby laying the foundation of the full Christianization of country. The spreading of Christianity was undertaken not only by captives but also by political fugitives, as were Saint Gregory, baptizer of Armenia, or Saint Columba, the baptizer of Scotland, who sentenced themselves to exile in the countries of their mission, or as Saint Patrick, Apostle of Ireland, who was slave in his youth but came back to Ireland to preach as a free man, or Ulfila, Apostle of Germans, whose parents were slaves, but he was free man and was held in high esteem by his people. Regardless of whether preachers were of aristocratic origins or not, evangelization was performed not by professional missionaries, but by those who undertook their missions by their own initiatives. Taking into account the period during which the sources were written, it should be noted that a large amount of information concerning the history of evangelization of frontier lands, personalities, mission tactics, and other aspects were vague. I will refer to characters of frontier missionaries who preached Christianity in the different borders of Pax Romana, to having aimed to show that sources mainly prescribe similar features to all of those preachers. Multiculturality and marginality were crucial among these traits. A striking example of that was Gregory the Illuminator, baptizer of Armenia. The main source on the history of Gregory and his mission is the History of Armenia, also known as the History of Saint Gregory and Conversion of Armenia. The author of history called himself Agatangelos, and he represented himself as contemporary of events in the history, that is end of 3rd and early 4th century. However, he even wrote that he did this work by order of King Tiridates himself. However, most probably this work was written in the 5th century. Also, it was based on the legend about Gregory and Tiridates. Gatangelos presented an archetypical character of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, which was influenced by both Christian and pre-Christian beliefs and cultures. He created collective character reflecting how early Christian Armenians saw themselves in the Christian world and how they imagined their heroes. According to Gatangelos, Gregory was Parthian by origin, a representative of the dynasty of Arshakid dynasty in Parthia. He was son of Anak, who treacherously murdered Armenian king Khosrov. Infant Gregory was the only one in his family who was taken from Armenia, saved for execution, and was brought up in Caesarea by foster parents in Christian tradition. When Gregory learned about his origins, he decided to abandon his lay life and spend the word of evangel in Armenia. At the age of 35, he left his wife and sons and come to Armenia. When he came here, in fact, he had no family, no kin, no homeland, and no nation. Moreover, he came here being son of archenemy of Armenian king and Armenian nation, and he came to fulfill his mission in the country where the crime against king and nation was committed. Gregory was presented in history of Armenia as an independent missionary who wasn't sent by any imperial authority, but served to the interest of the Armenians solely, undertaking his own initiative, which was, of course, blessed by God himself. With his multicultural and multinational background, Gregory was ideal for the role of baptizer of Armenia, with its mixed culture and language background, which was situated between Roman and Persian empires. During the same period, Christianization emerged in Caucasian Iberia, modern Georgia. The tradition testified that the evangelization of the country was performed not only by captive, but also by women, by Saint Nino. It was quite unusual for early Christian tradition to prescribe such important role to women at that period. First account about the captured woman who converted the Iberian king and nation to Christianity were presented by Greco-Roman ecclesiastical historiographers Rufinus, Socrates, Sozomen, and Theodoret. They, however, didn't mention her origin and name. First author to mention her name was Armenian historiographer of 5th century, Moses Hornatsi, who associated her activity with activity of Gregory the Illuminator. Despite the difficulties, differences in the details, the Greco-Roman authors' narratives presented the same narrative about pious woman living among barbarians who became known due to her ability to heal through praying. She healed the queen and won the king over after the incident during hunting, which led the royal family and later whole country to Christian faith. Devout servant of his people and apostle of Goth, Ulfila, also had Cappadocian roots. He can be described as stranger among his own people. According to church history of Philostorgius, Ulfila was not purebred Goth. His parents, or more probably one of his parents, were captured by plundering Goths from their village, and during the time they were integrated to Gothic society, and the name of Ulfila is evidence of that. It means little wolf in Gothic. Family of Ulfila preserved Christian faith, despite it was not popular at the time among Goths. Ulfila, who was fluent in Gothic, Greek, and Latin, was perfectly suited for a role of preacher and leader in the environment of mixed ethnic groups, religions, and cultures. The community in which he preached certainly consisted of people of not only Gothic, but also of Goths, but a large amount of displaced foreigners living under Gothic rule. Taking into account his education, his knowledge of Roman culture, his flexibility, Goths see him as perfect person to hold negotiations with Rome on their behalf. He was included in the delegation sent around 340-41 to Constantinople by Gothic Confederation of Thuringi to negotiate with Constantius II about relocation of Goths to Moesia. The emperor was greatly interested by the personality of Ulfila, who was subsequently consecrated by the emperor leading Bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia as first bishop of Goth. It is for that reason that many researchers emphasize the imperial nature of Ulfila's mission. Yet, Ulfila was not imperial agent. His actions were intended to promote the interests of his own Gothic people, which to some extent coincided with the interests of the empire. The best example of Ulfila's devotion was translation of Bible into Gothic, or at least part of it. Translation into national language implies some level of independence from Latin-speaking church, which was also an important step in the formation of nation. As we can see the example of Gregory, Ulfila, Nino, and other coming later, being inhabitants of frontiers themselves, they were more receptive to culture and way of thinking of frontier people. No missionary with imperial colonial way of thinking could have succeeded in their task in the frontiers. To back up what was told, I would like to exemplify a mission of Palladius and St. Patrick to the very edge of the known world, to Ireland. Prosperous of Aquitaine witnessed a mission organized by a Roman church to Ireland. Palladius, having been, it is a citation, Palladius, having been ordained by Pope Celestine, is sent as their first bishop to Irish who believed in Christ. However, having been mentioned by Prosper, Palladius simply vanished from the historical record. A possible reason for that is that character of Palladius, who was not have been attracted enough for indigenous people. He came from Roman intellectual circles and would have considered the idea of good barbarian inconvincible. The glory of other missionary, Patrick, overshadowed the memory of Palladius, of first bishop of Ireland. The character of half-educated slave Patrick, in contrast to that of Palladius, was accepted by indigenous people, presented in history and rewrote many times by different authors. Patrick, being a Roman citizen and Briton by origin, considered himself British, Roman, and Irish simultaneously. We know about his mission from his own writing, from Confessio and Epistola. Um, his mission took place in the mid-5th century. Patrick was an inhabitant of Roman western limits, who probably lived in the western coast of Britain in small town. His father was deacon and decurion, and his grandfather was priest and decurion too. They occupied their position at a time when empire was collapsed and the provinces were in a chronically hopeless state. To be Ticurian in a distant province town in the 4th and 5th century was an enviable position. Such landlords carried the main burden of imperial taxation. The residents of distant provinces were not only poor economically, but they didn't enjoy any security either. A striking example of which is St. Patrick by himself and thousands of captives mentioned in Confessio. St. Patrick was almost 16 years old when he was captured by Irish marauders and taken to the very edge of the world, as he told. And only after 6 years, with the help of and guidance of God, he escaped from slavery in Ireland and returned home. However, soon he had a prophetic dream in which Irish asked him to come back to Ireland and save them from with preaching of Christianity. So Patrick, who had suffered 6 long years in Ireland and dreamed of day when he could return to Britain, came back to Ireland and quite probably never left the country again. A very similar archetypical story is presented about Frumentius or Abba Salama, who baptized Asna, king of Auxum and his kingdom. The tradition is transmitted by numerous authors who can separate it into 2 categories. Sources represented by Greek and Latin ecclesiastical historiographers and Ethiopian sources. First group of sources is earlier. Both category of sources preserve the same biographical account with some differences. St. Frumentius originated from trade center Tyre, which had developed within Hellenistic culture and being situated between Roman and Sasanian Empire, played an essential role in the trade between East and West. According to the widely known narrative, Meropius, a philosopher from Tyre, was traveling by Red Sea to India with his young brothers, Odysseus and Frumentius, to compete with philosopher Metrodorus, who sojourned in the region. During this, their return voyage, Meropius and his brothers was assaulted by enemies or barbarians, as they were variously labeled in the sources, while sailing along African shore of the Red Sea. The entire crew, including Meropius, was killed. 2 youths were spared by virtue of their age and brought up brought to Auxum as slaves. Situated in the crossroads of world trade, Auxum took control of most of the region-wide trade in the Red Sea basin, attracting Syrian, Jewish, Armenian, and Roman merchants, who certainly had a great influence on Ethiopian culture. Brothers originating from other multicultural trade center and being well educated appeared quite capable to integrate into Ethiopian realities. Despite their lack of freedom, they achieved influential place in Auxum court. Frumentius entrusted with keeping the royal archives, while Odysseus was appointed the cup-bearer. After the king's death, they were asked by Queen to educate her child Esna, designed as a new ruler. According to sources, Frumentius was actively engaged not only with the natives but also with foreigner traders in the kingdom. During this time, Frumentius managed to find Christian merchants in the port of Red Sea Adulis. He supported them to build an oratory for praying, and many locals were successfully Christianized. When the king had grown up, Frumentius and Odysseus were allowed to return to their homeland. According to Rufinus, Galasius, and Socrates, after the brothers were set free, the queen and young king were trying to dissuade Frumentius and Odysseus from abandoning country. That testified an important role of brothers played within a royal family as Christian administrators. When the king grew up, Odysseus went back to Tyre and eventually was ordained as a priest. Despite Frumentius' desire to travel back to Tyre, he didn't do this journey. Instead, being preoccupied with the fate of Ethiopian people who became his own, he headed to Alexandria. He urged Archbishop of Athanasius to consecrate to send a bishop to Ethiopians and continue preaching of Christianity here. Athanasius, who had already taken the episcopate, realized that it is not possible to find a more suitable person for this mission than Odysseus, who was Roman citizen who was born in Roman limes, and but he was formatted as Christian in Ethiopia, and he was seen as their own by natives. So Odysseus was consecrated as first bishop among Ethiopians by Archbishop of Alexandria. So after some achievements in Christianization of countries, the foundation of Christian communities, and importantly, the baptism of King Esna, the mission of Frumentius was supported by ecumenical authorities. Simultaneously, after conversion of Armenian King Tiridates and declaration of Christianity as a state religion, according to Agathocles, Tiridates, along with Gregory the Illuminator, set off to Constantine to confirm the subordination of Armenian Church to Ecumenical Church, which at that time was controlled by Emperor. Due to this journey, the newly created Armenian Church was incorporated into Ecumenical Church, and Gregory is Illuminator and his successors were consecrated in Caesarea in 370s. So, concluding what was told, I will summarize conclusion in several bullets. In frontier countries, Christianity was preached by non-professional missionaries whose mission were predominantly of their own undertaking. The main characteristics attributed to frontier missionaries are multinationality, marginality, and social-cultural intermediateness. All the aforementioned preachers come to country of their mission from limits of other territories. All of the mentioned missionaries were originally Roman citizens, but as inhabitants of frontiers themselves, they were more receptive to the culture and way of thinking of people of countries of their mission. No missionary with imperial colonial way of thinking could have succeeded in their tasks in frontier. And eventually, upon arriving in the country of their mission, the apostles totally reformed and could never lead those countries again. The countries of mission played a special and rather sacred role in the apostles' spiritual formation. They had no place among their compatriots anymore. The notion of fully devotion themselves to indigenous people was pre-limited in lives of their saints. Thank you very much for your attention.